right, so welcome, Javier. It's great to have you here for this next
Absolutely.
edition of our podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and so the scope of this discussion, I really wanted it to be centered around what is Frontier Capital Trust, because we exist in a space where there are so many different theories, ideas, practices that when people come across our content, I imagine that they have all sorts of ideas about what this is. And it is really colored by what they've experienced in other places, other ideas around law and solutions and business and finance. And so I really thought it was important for them to get an understanding of what this is from our perspective. And so what is Frontier Capital Trust to you?
Wow. Well, to me, it's many things. But to me, it's been an opportunity to be able to dive into a world that otherwise I would not have ever gotten into. So I don't come from a traditional law background or anything like that. My early business success basically put me in a position where I had to come up with solutions as to what to do with my property. And, as I started getting older and thinking about family and real estate, it was important for me to find out exactly how to protect these things, that I call my property. And with those things is rights, freedoms, and so on and so forth. So to me, what Frontier Capital Trust in the beginning was a path to understanding something that essentially was kind of unknown. And, there's a lot of nuances to it, but long story short, the law has changed. And because it's changed, it's also changed the way that we decide to see the law. And I thought that there was a clear mistranslation, one that was common sense and the other that had other interests in it. So, I thought that because there was this gaping void of misunderstanding, that there was a spot and a place for it in the world for people to come into and start to do the research on for themselves. Because ultimately what I wanted to understand was my estate. What was mine, what was the state, where the lines were drawn, and what that means to my family and my legacy and for the rest of civilization. So once I started to see that there was a clear path and that others had done this too, but not everyone had the resources, let's just say, to kind of pull it all together and be able to create a system that essentially allows for people to get into this in a way that's palpable, in a way that's understandable, that it's not too overwhelming. And it's a difficult world to try to meddle, between the legal and, what people day to day do. So Frontier Capital Trust became somewhat of an educational resource, a place where I can go to verify facts of law and court cases and things like that, that I knew I needed in order to be comfortable to take the next step with whatever venture I was doing, whether that was building a new business, creating a new charitable organization, whatever the interest was. I knew that I had to go about it in a way that I understood, because if I didn't do these things for myself, they would always be, opaque. They would always be a mystery to me. And I never liked that. I always wanted to really understand the things that I was getting into. And unfortunately, things like contracts, when we get into those types of things, we kind of delegate that critical thinking and we kind of put it aside. And so now we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. And Frontier Capital Trust was kind of a result of a lot of that confusion. And we're still here to try to grow and facilitate as much information as people need.
Yeah. And, likewise, I didn't have much of an interest in law or finance at all growing up, because I saw it as really futile. One thing that's very interesting about where you and I both come from is that we almost, by virtue of our journey, have removed the ability to make excuses in other people. We both come from a place where none of these solutions were tangible or offered. There was no clear roadmap we kind of inherited the zeitgeist of the previous generation, which was basically, as you said, it's, oh, if you want something legal done, you go to a lawyer. If you want, all of these external authorities become the arbiter of what is good and bad and right and wrong. And what we're doing is showing a pathway for each individual to take the reins in an efficient and simple way over these more complex and obscure topics. And for me, that's exactly what Frontier Capital Trust has been. Prior to coming on board, before you asked me to join the organization, I had some limited experience with trust and some success with trust. And that had piqued my curiosity and really allowed me to put my foot into the door, get my foot into the door of the arena of law and commercial entities and business. But it wasn't until gaining access to not only your experience and your knowledge around the background of the legal framework of all this stuff, but the actual course material and, eventually seeing everybody else's application of this information that I really began to not only see that there was a possibility, but to see that I was competent enough to actually do this stuff on my own. And so for me, Frontier Capital Trust has been a solution to the problem of the overwhelming sense that resistance is futile, essentially. The idea that unless I have millions of dollars, there's no chance for me to get ahead in business or protect what I have or have a meaningful access to moving myself forward in life. And that's really, since coming in contact with this information, the effect that it's had on me and the effect that I get to see it have on other people.
Yeah. What's really interesting is, it puts me off to another point because a lot of people already have access to this information, but again, they're not around, let's say, the right problems or the right circumstances where it forces them to pay attention. It forces them to seek out a solution for themselves rather than delegating it to others. So, it wasn't just, asset protection and all of that. There was something obviously more there that had to deal with meaning, dealing with like being responsible, being a steward of property. And once we start to get into, more of what trust means, it starts to kind of unfold within itself how the rest of the world sees how finances and everything operates. But it really depends where you're coming from about what you know about trust. So we at least I ask of you, and we ask of you to suspend whatever definition that you have, and you look at some of the raw sources that define what trust is before securities came in and were introduced. Then when you start to see how that is structured, we're able to see that it isn't just a one size fits all type of solution. That really the problem is unique and it's particular, and it's particular to individuals assessing their own problems and how they'll go about solving those problems on their own. It isn't something that you're just going to go through and be able to get a lawyer and have them fix all of a sudden. It does take critical thinking, and it does take somebody like yourself to trust yourself to go about and go through something like building your legacy, building your estate. So I understand that many people might have assumptions about what trusts are, but when we look at a lot of the information that we put out there, trust is a vehicle. Trust is an ability to move not only what you have custody of, but these things could be securities, it could be pieces of real estate, what have you. The confusion is because of our laws, of our securities, our contract law, in which people tie themselves into the jurisdiction of these security notes and don't seem to understand where, liability starts or jurisdiction ends. And all of these things, like I said, are particular. And with Frontier Capital Trust, if you guys are going to come out and ask questions and try to figure out what is the best route for you. We're not going to give you just a piece of paper, and don't expect a one size fits all answer, because that's not how the real world works. We bring real solutions to people that have particular problems, and especially if they're pressing problems. This is why and how really I think Frontier Capital Trust is apart from anybody else, is because we see things as practically as possible, in that whatever we have to say is limited by the result. So we're not going to say this, or that if we don't have experience, if we haven't done it before. And that's why we welcome anybody with any situation. We have people with $1 million judgments. They're scared, they're about to lose their home, all sorts of other circumstances that you might find yourself. Don't put your eggs all in one basket and try to find some sovereignty guy whose only interest is to get away from the system, without having considered your life, the things that you've built, the work that you have, your social security, maybe benefits. What do you do about these things? We can't just let these ideas go. They're obligations. So Frontier Capital Trust becomes this bridge point for people to come through and assess not only what trust is, but where does it belong in particular to my journey? Where does it belong in reference to what my goals are? Then we're starting to get somewhere. Then from there, we can start to talk about strategy, repairing your credit, building trust credit, and moving forward in a commercial way that is totally rid of excess liability that doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, and it's a different process for just about everybody. And what makes us unique is that we are not ideological about the information. There's a lot of hoopla out there about the legal person, public franchises, these kind of implied contracts and the implied trust. And what makes us unique is that we see the legal person for what it is. We see that it has a distinct characteristics that define it, in that it was created by the state. It was given to you at birth. It has built-in contractual terms that say things like, hey, if I make income as defined by this title, I already inherently agree that I'm going to pay X amount of tax rate on that income. If you decide that I have been a bad boy and you want some of my money that you feel owed to you, you have a built-in backdoor that you can come and take that. You can garnish the wages, you can seize the assets that are in this name. Now, the other side to the legal person, as you mentioned before, is the credit score. If you want to get a loan, we've said in our content before that, like, the IRS is not an enemy. And in fact, they actually provide a service that is extremely valuable, and there is no viable substitute for, in that they keep track of accounting on such a vast scale that it would boggle the mind to behold. And so we see that the legal person is a business type. First of all, it's not married to us. It's not inherently tied to us. We can choose to use it or we can choose not to use it. It's not me. And that's one of the biggest hurdles mentally that people need to overcome, is that the legal person is not you. It's a business type. It's over here on the side. Start separating yourself mentally from it. And then with that, you can choose to use it for its strengths or not use it for its drawbacks. And that's where the trust comes in, is we now have, on top of being able to do estate planning and things like that, you have the ability to restructure various types of commercial engagements through the trust, so that they are no longer defined and confined by the statutory limitations set on the public franchises like legal persons and LLCs, and instead redefine them as, these are ways in which I, as a trustee, am engaging in commerce so that I can serve another party. My beneficiaries will benefit from everything that I'm doing. I hold nothing. I want nothing. I have no interest in all of these, no personal interest in all of these things. I'm doing them strictly so that I can benefit another party. And with that comes the amazing benefits of asset protection and tax advantages that the trust offers.
Yeah, it's really more I mean, we can peddle around a lot of technical examples, and we do all the time with our clients and all of that. But really, what I've brought it down to, and you brought it as well down to, just a frame of looking at it. And if we start to see, where the power is actually lying, our ability to contract. So are we saying that there's no such thing as a contract without the government? That there is no such thing? Well, wouldn't that just be Great Britain all over again and the American Revolution all over again? What are we talking about? What are you assuming? Because what people are assuming is that we're living in Great Britain and we can't do business without the crown. And that's absolutely not the case. But because we're swimming in securities and all this admiralty law, maritime law, these parallel forms of law, what they're doing is they're saying, here's a benefit, but we're not going to tell you where your true powers are. Here's a benefit. And by accepting this benefit, you are releasing your rights. You're releasing the things that were put in place for you to protect your sense of self, to protect people from implying what certain things mean on a contract. And really, this is all that's been continuously being pressed upon people. They're saying, this is who you are. This is what's going on. And that's not the case. The thing that defines us isn't so much the contract, but literally the mindset and the way that we hold things and the administration of it. Is not because you have one document, like that's not enough. That's not enough material evidence. There has to be built up a case against you. And having one little document here is not. It's the way you live life, the way that you've sworn to conduct yourself. And that is apparent administratively. This is how it's done properly. There's no such thing as tax avoidance and you're going to get caught. It's like we're expressing and we know exactly what the law is. And that's why we're good at what we do, because we know their threshold and we know our threshold, and we don't want to intertwine these mixed interests. And you'll hear it time and time again, people out there talking, hey, you don't want to mix the public and the private. They don't know what that means, because I come from a securities background. And really, it gets complicated when we're changing, borrowing debt, changing notes, all of this stuff, because essentially, we don't know where the collateral is. And eventually, we get to find out that we are the collateral. And that really the meaning of money and all that stuff is in the hands of the public. So if we become trustees, the way that we look at money changes. The way that you operate literally in the world changes. The way that you do business with others is completely different. There is way more considerations to take that are single-handedly going to give you the advantage in any business transaction. Most people are going to be running their LLCs, their persons, all of these things. And sure, they might have a good business idea, but really it's the way in which we hold things, it's the way that we hold property and the vehicle in which that takes place that's going to define what you're actually doing here in this world and the tax liability that goes with it.
Yes, exactly. I think what would be a good exercise would be I want to briefly just kind of explain so that I can help people orient their mind. I want to briefly give a overview of what the average person's business or commercial profile looks like, right? You're born, you get a legal person. Now, when I say public franchises, what I mean is literally like a Subway branch. You can own it, you can operate it, but it belongs to Subway. If you don't follow their rules, it's their property, you're using it. So you were born, you get a public franchise of the state called a legal person. Okay, you go to school, you do your things. Maybe you get some student loans, which is a type of debt that you're acquiring with your legal person. That's a business debt that you are acquiring. You get out of college, you decide, okay, I want to get into this business that I've been studying about. And you go, okay, well, what are my options? I think because of the way I want to do my taxes, I'm going to do an S Corp, which is just another public franchise. The difference is that it's a different genus or species of public franchise. It's got slightly different flavor, slightly different business hours, you could say. It's a Quiznos rather than a Subway. And most people will do that. Then they go into their business and they say, okay, I'm making a little bit of money now. I'm going to make some investments. I'm going to take my legal person and I'm going to work with a licensed financial advisor to create this public investment account.
Yeah.
Now, in each of those cases, and there's an infinite number of variety that people may little tweaks of that situation, but it's essentially all the same. You are from cradle to the grave unwittingly using Subway franchises to do things where it's not always advantageous to do that. You can
Yeah.
easily conceive of why it might be advantageous to create your own sandwich shop where you get the farm to table ingredients, where it's all organic, clean food, where you're not doing business hours when they say you can close on Sunday. You have total control. And not only that, Subway, the state, the larger franchise, has no right to come in and tell you that you need to use their ingredients. And
Mhm.
so this is the very simple analogy for people to really wrap their head around. You know, unwittingly, you're using all of these public franchises, thinking that that's just you take it for granted. That's just
Yeah.
what you do.
It's convenient.
Right. And so what we're showing you is that you don't have to go to Subway. You can go into business for yourself. You have the right to create entity types and engage in contracts that don't imply consent. Do not petition the state as a third party intervener or overseer of these engagements. And this is a truly lost art. And it's one of the linchpins of what this work is. And
Yeah.
another reason why people are so confused about what the irrevocable trust is, because what they know about trust comes from the public franchise equivalent that is sanctioned by a licensed attorney with the state.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I can make a contract and I don't have to I don't have to ask for permission. Yeah, that's right. You're a grown person. You are of sound mind and age. You can make that decision. You could put your hand on a piece of paper and lay out your terms. People will have a small extension of that, which, sometimes when the people are getting older, they're thinking about their kids, they'll think of a will. And that's important, but that's not all the way there yet. We want to settle it with a trust. A will is leaving it for grabs. You're leaving it to the highest bidder, and that highest bidder is whoever has the largest credit claim against your person. So there's obvious benefits to using the person, but we want to know where those benefits are. And I'm realizing people are not seeing that. They're not seeing that, hey, maybe I should keep this because I'm paying Social Security. I have good benefits and good health care here. And on the other hand, you have a situation where, a trust is not going to be the answer for them at the moment. It makes no sense for them. But they'll be confused because they'll be approached with like, oh, you need an espresso, you need this type of trust so that you'll be fine. It's like, well, you need a critical eye on this. You need someone with experience on dealing with property transfers and all of these things, so you can actually figure out the time and place in which the execution would be the best. And not only, this is why Matt and I's job is very hard, is because not only is there a learning curve to deal with, but the ability to, not just the learning curve, but the energy that it takes to be able to retain that new form of thinking, which is crazy because in a way I would have never imagined that we would have to be expressing what is already inherently in us. Why would we have to do that unless there's other beings in the world that are implying other things and they made contracts without us knowing? And then they're saying, hey, if they do this, this triggers this. I'm like, well, now I get why I have to express. But before I didn't, because people don't know that there's these implications of law happening every single day against your person. If they understood this, they would know that the position is not of an attack. The positions of one that's neutrality, and if need be, of defense. So if there's a claim against you, you owe the IRS money, you owe creditors money, something is going on, you can move your finances, the things you work so hard to make your living, to protect your children, move those things strategically so that we don't suffer the consequences of being negligent on the day that we decided to create an LLC, decided to create a corporation without knowing why we did it.
Yes, and with the implied contracts that come with the state and the implied consent of jurisdiction with public franchise and public commerce, there comes this whole school of thought around correcting the status and changing the status of the legal person. And I always like to mention on that, because inevitably we're talking about trust, and the discussion with correcting your status hinges largely upon the idea that when you correct your status, you get access to your SKB trust, and you can start issuing securities based on the value of the account that's been made in your name and all of these things. And we always like to caution people in that these implied contracts absolutely exist. I'm not here to dispute that whatsoever. I'm not here to dispute that the value generated by the Social Security account is not basically the backing of our currency. It's that I'm not debating that at all. But when it comes to discussions around solutions, it is very important to remain grounded. If you're going to make a claim, and if you're going to claim that you have a solution to that claim, you need to show evidence of that. And I simply do not see that in the correcting of the status type of thinking. And when you were talking about before, only somebody of a sound mind can evidence an express trust. In my opinion, doing this work of creating your own express trust and managing your own estate is the best evidence that you are not a dead fiction, a talking dead, walking dead corporation as they claim.
Yeah.
And the issue that I see with the correcting of the status, well, there's many facets of issues with it. One of the main ones is that when you're petitioning the state to change your status of your legal person, you are, first of all, you're petitioning the state. You're asking for permission. That is not something that you do when you actually have power to administer yourself. Second of all, you're creating this paper trail that says, hey, I am against your system. I'm dissatisfied with your system. I am disaffected, and I am going out of my way to petition you and let you know I'm changing this about this. Yeah. Third, if you're doing all of this work with the assumption that at the end of the tunnel there exists this potential for creating securities for millions of dollars to pay off any debt, whatever, you are asking for something for nothing, essentially. And that is one of the fundamental affronts to natural law, to the natural process. And if you want something, you must create value. You must create a vacuum in which that thing is drawn towards you. And, there are ways of gaining access to things like unsecured credit, but that requires work on your part. That requires building value. That requires building up the profile and the credit worthiness of a trust. That's not something for nothing.
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to petition the state with a couple of types of forms and then now you're going to be able to get millions of dollars, to me, it's a giant, screaming, flaming red flag that something isn't right, Mm-hmm. So I always try to reframe the discussion around correcting your status by saying, hey, if you can create your own contract and you start administering your affairs in private, that is more evidence than filling out more government paperwork to change the status of your person.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see why people think that more paperwork is usually the answer. And especially because I get, that there's debt securities, against the person, but at the same time, the amount of work, the verified amount of work, the procedure isn't uniformly clear or repeatable with everybody. So, and even if it was, what are we doing? Aren't we just creating more debt against us? I don't understand what's happening. What the purpose of using this untapped money? To me, there's a point where that fails, because you can only do work that has actual result. And at some point, being able to go outside of your way to prove that you are not part of this existing system in itself kind of condemns you. Because really, like we've said it since the beginning, it's like if you're true to, if you are true to God and true with who you are, why would you need permission? If you know the real reason, why would you need to ask permission for something like a tax exemption? If you were a true church, why would you go and create an LLC then? Why would you ask these permissions? Well, because you don't know what the trade-off is. You've just been told this is how you do business, but you haven't read the fine print. You haven't